Welcome to the Mars LOCI, where we talk about stuff about Mars. Pure and simple. First question is always the same: who wants to go to Mars? I want to go to Mars. Might not be able to, but I want to go to Mars. I want to hear from the people who want to go to Mars. So shoot me a letter, shoot me an email. At the end of this broadcast, you'll find my address. I want to hear from you. Let me know what's going on. So this episode, we're going to talk about something that's extremely necessary, and it's necessary for wherever you're at, and it's called money. You know the old song, money, 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 money. Well, we're going to need it on Mars. We certainly need it on Earth, and I believe they need it everywhere in between. So, question of Mars, a question of money on Mars, not so simple. Lots of questions, how to figure that out and which way to go. So let's start with a brief history lesson for those people that don't know exactly, where money comes from, where it derives. So go back in history a little bit. Everybody used to use barter systems. So the guy that raised cows, if he wanted some cereal, he had to barter with the guy who raised wheat, in the next pasture. The problem is that the guy that raised wheat, old Jeffrey, who was a wheat raiser, if he didn't need a cow, he's going to say, I don't really want that cow. So now what do you do? So the poor cow guy goes without cereal. All right, that happens a lot in history. If you don't happen to have something that the other guy's interested in to barter with, how do you get the other goods? What do you do to transfer that information back and forth? So throughout history, that's been an issue, and they've handled it different ways. Some of the older civilizations did have a fairly common routine of trading animals and goods for money as opposed to money. So early on, we've seen a lot of civilizations that used metal for coins and rare metals like gold and silver. And everybody says, well, okay, well, what the hell? Why are those used for barter, for value? Well, the theory is this: is that you can't just walk out in your house, reach down and grab a hunk of gold. It's kind of rare. In addition to that, you have to process it. You have to go through a scenario where you stamp it into a coin in most cases and see how pure it is. All right, those are all issues. So early on, people figured out, civilizations figured out that the rarity of the metal and what they used, they had some formulas, they used different things, how many hours it took to produce an ounce of gold. All right, those are some of the things they did early on to figure out what the value was. So it's just based on the amount of labor it takes to produce that ore or that gold or the silver or whatever it happens to be. So that's where that value came from. So that's something that was intrinsic, wasn't going to go away no matter what you do over history or time. Gold would be rare, and you wouldn't be able to just go out and pick up a hunk of gold. It would have some value to it based on a lot of different things. And it looked nice. People like gold, they can melt it down. So that's where that value came from, and that's where a lot of the fiat currency came from. So fiat currency, basically, it's just an expression that means it's, in this case, paper currency that is an underlying value of something. The paper itself has no value. All right, so that's not a big shock. So if you get some dollars that are left over from the Civil War, and whatever denomination, could be $100,000 bill. I don't think they made one, but if it was, what's the value of that piece of paper that had $100,000 on it? Now, maybe as an antique, it might have some value, but as a fiat currency, or representing currency in our country especially, it has almost no value. Doesn't have any worth. So what's happened over time is that every civilization that ever existed had to go through a lot of different issues to keep that civilization running. Even way back in the days when they had feudal wars back and forth, they had to buy food for the army, horses, feed for the horses, weapons, transportation. All those things came into play. So, they used a lot of different mechanisms back in the day. But as time went on, they created the fiat money system, which is essentially paper dollars, whatever they call them, pesos, dollars, real, whatever. Doesn't make any difference what they call them. It was essentially a fiat currency backed by someone willing to have that particular worth. So you say, all right, so how did they get that worth? How did the dollar become a dollar? How did the $5 bill become a $5 bill? So we're back at the same scenario. So now in our country, the only people that can create dollars are our government, the feds. Feds create dollars. This wasn't so many years ago. In fact, at the beginning of our country, a lot of the individual colonies created their own dollars. You had New York dollars, you had Carolina dollars, and the problem is that as they needed stuff, all right, whether it would be once again, feed for their little armies or weapons or whatever, they printed more dollars. So if they printed enough dollars, and they typically did that a lot, the dollars would be worth less and less and less and less. So you got, they printed up $1 million. The amount of goods out there remained the same. So they now printed up $3 million, and the same amount of goods out there. They didn't just double overnight. They could print that up overnight, but the stuff didn't double overnight. So that's inflation. So now it takes 3 of those dollars to buy the same whatever, bow and arrow. It doesn't make any difference, whatever it is. So the problem is that the amount of goods in a civilization or organization or a place is fairly finite. I mean, it changes over time, but it doesn't change instantaneously. And a lot of those goods are driven by needs, and people's desire for things. And the ultimate goal is to be able to produce enough money from whatever means. In our case, we work for it. In every case, there's a certain amount of toil involved to get your dollars or your money to buy things. We have a far more established system today, because we have a lot of banking regulations. We have a lot of situations where, one of the big problems with creating fiat dollars is that they can be duplicated. They can be counterfeit. And, especially the United States, but every country has gone to great lengths now to keep those dollars from being duplicated easily. They do all kind of stuff, special ink, special paper, threads in there that have, electronic signatures, just on and on and on, different stuff. So counterfeiting is not the big problem it used to be, but it costs them more to make those dollars too. So we've come to a point in our society where the full faith and credit of the United States sits behind the fiat dollars that we produce. And we are one of the better actors around the world at our dollars, even though, we have inflation, we have things that we do that's wrong. We overproduce money in many occasions, and unfortunately, a lot of that is directed or driven by politics. One political party over the other political party will decide they want to hand out, whatever, $10,000 a person. Doesn't make any difference, whatever it is. Now, having a refund on your taxes is different than being handed money out from the government. If everybody's given $10,000 from the government, you're going to have a certain amount of inflation in that, depending on where that $10,000 comes from. If the $10,000 is printed up, once again, no more goods, no more services available than there were before it was printed. But now everybody's getting an extra $10,000 to pay for it. So what happens? The value of each of those things goes up because people want it and they're willing to spend more money on it to get it because they have more money to spend on it. And that's really what it comes right down to. So that's just one simple explanation of what happens when you talk about inflation and the spiraling things that drive cost of goods up. Now, the other side of that coin is that advances in civilization have helped us to produce a lot. We produce, many things in a much more automated way than we did many years ago. I mean, you can go out and buy a simple ashtray, okay? And that ashtray is worth today pennies, whereas if you look back on, 10,000 years ago, somebody created out of a piece of pottery and it's worth a fair amount. It's only in the wealthy establishments. So things have changed a lot, and of course they didn't have cars or airplanes or anything back in the day. So So we've done a lot to enhance our civilization, and there will come a day, fairly soon, where the amount of goods created will be created by less and less labor. It's already happening. A lot of people don't know it, but a typical car from a manufacturer, the amount of hours that it takes, and when I say hours, I mean labor in human hours. So the amount of labor that a human being touches that car from start to finish varies a bit, but it's in the 20-hour to 30-hour range. So say 30 hours. So in 30 hours, 30 man hours, okay, a car is created. I want you to just think about that for a second, because anybody that's ever worked on anything, if you have to replace your carburetor in an old car or fuel injection in a newer car, it could take you 20 hours just to get the stuff off, fixed up, and put back on again. That's not putting the entire car together from scratch. So that's phenomenal. And that is done by automated machinery and robots. Those are advances we've done over the years, and we're getting better and better and better at them. There are plants today, believe it or not, that are lights out. So what that means is that there's some printers being produced in different countries, not so much ours, but coming in ours, that the plastics are poured into the giant hoppers outside, and then on the other side the printers come out. That's phenomenal. It means it's injection molded. The pieces are separated, put together, along with the electronics and all the metal parts, which are stamped and brought over. And then at the other side of the assembly line, which is done automatically, a printer pops up. Every 2 minutes, 5 minutes, doesn't make any difference. But the labor involved in all that process is minuscule. Now, there are people fixing the machines, going in and fixing the software, but it's minuscule. It's not much compared to the entire process. Basically, I call it a lights out type manufacturing, and there's several things going on like that. 3D printing is a lights out process. You plug in the printer, put in the specific design of the part you want, and it does it. Produces it right there, which is pretty cool stuff. Anyway, ultimately, as we mature as a society, and as people like Elon Musk create robots, which are capable of doing more than just a typical assembly, because that's what's necessary. You obviously have to be able to produce different things, even to the point of crops, digging up a crop, putting a crop in, whatever the deal is. If that's done without human interface or interference, whatever, what's the value of that good? So theoretically, and this won't exist for a while, but I think it'll come to pass. You take a look at Star Trek's economy. If you've ever watched any Star Trek, and it's just one of many science fiction shows that shows this, it's a money-free society. So what does that mean? All right, well, in Star Trek's case, what that means is they have the replicator. All right, so it's not far off a 3D printer, and it's not far off what we'll have. May not take that form, but the point is that basically they can push a button or sign a piece of paper to say what they want, or get on a computer and order something, and it'll be made automatically by robots or machines. So there's nobody doing it, no people, doing the process. And at the end of the day, there's no labor involved. The cost of many goods in this country are very labor dependent, and it depends on the specific, pieces that we buy. And then at that point, you get it. It just comes to you, whether it's a printer like we're talking about or a new car. Okay. So that works all the way back to supply chain. It doesn't just work if it assembles that particular supply chain. So in a car, it may only take 35 man hours or 30 man hours to put together that car. But all of those pieces that go into that car are produced in a variety of different places. And they take material. So somebody's digging the material out of the ground, somebody's transporting it to where it has to be. It's also being milled or changed in form to work with that particular part. Once again, all the way back that chain has to be automated, and is automated in many cases. There's some mines in South America, especially huge mines, that is got a series of giant trucks and front end loaders that there's nobody operating them. They're all self-operated, and that's pretty cool. You know, it fills up the truck runs back, dumps the ore into whatever is going to be processed at, comes all the way back and gets filled up again. No humans involved. So that's pretty cool. It digs it up, puts it in a truck, takes it back. Very little human involvement. However, we're not there yet. Mars won't be there anytime soon. And without a very high functioning robot, we're going to still need people to do certain jobs. You know, to build a house, to put a 2x4, put a nail in a 2x4, to, you know, climb up and fix your roof, to do the plumbing operation. Once again, believe that'll come a time that'll be able to be done automatically. It's not there yet. So I just want to mention that in passing. That it's very possible we'll have a zero-sum society that will have no need for a lot of money to pass through people's hands. But until then, we need money because you have to have some kind of a reward for your labor. Let's put it that way. Okay, you know, whether it's a scoreboard. I mean, you know, people that are very wealthy, like Elon Musk and those people, you know, the money is a score. The more they have, the better they score, the better they like it, and that's what motivates them to do better. I mean, they do it for other reasons. I believe Musk is really you know, does a lot of the stuff for the people. I think he actually enjoys that, and that's part of his motivation to do it for people. I think that he also likes the money. I do. Anyway, the point is that, you know, at any point in the future or now, I think that we're going to need money in the near future. So back to the problem of what do we do on Mars. So let's explore one more thing quickly. That's just what we just talked about is fiat money. So the big danger in that, of course, with any society, we've already seen it. We've experienced it a lot of different ways. Is you know, non-responsible governments led by whoever cranking out more money than there's a value for. You know, it's just not a hard thing to do. They need more stuff and they need to do something. You know, the answer to a lot of them is crank out more money. A lot of them don't understand that more money running around the system, all that means is, you know, a lot more money chasing the same number of goods. What's going to happen is that, you know, you're going to use it. If you want something, if you need something, you're going to use that money. That's all there is to it. So the other way to go is electronic money. Now, the one thing we've got that's appeared over the last really 20 years is it's really e-commerce is what they call it, and it's very close to fiat money, but it is dependent upon fiat money. So if you go on to in this case Amazon and want to buy something, you use a credit card or some form of electronic commerce, PayPal, and that's e-commerce. They buy it based on your credit and your money from your account or some account. You know, it could be a credit card, it could be directly from your account or from PayPal or various, you know, Venmo, whatever. So this is still fiat money, still your money, still dollars and cents in our case, or yen or whatever it comes from, a different country. But it's done electronically, so it means you don't have to physically transfer dollars to that individual or to that, you know, firm. Then we come to Bitcoin, you know, or Ethereum, or there's several different ones. That's not the only one. So a lot of people don't understand what these Bitcoins and Ethereum really are. And it's hard to understand. They're not that simple of a product. So Bitcoin was theorized, I think it was 2021, and they come up with an idea to create a product that didn't exist. That's really what comes right down to it. And they did it mathematically. What they did is they come some complicated formula to create this particular product, and they decentralized it. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that there's 1 million computers around the world, and you know, once you have a product like a Bitcoin that can be identified by unique identifiers, and it's registered all over the place. So, you know, 1,000 separate recipients know that Bitcoin XXXY1 belongs to, this specific number, which represents you in this case, and it's either a full Bitcoin or a tenth of a Bitcoin or whatever percentage. But it's also locked into what they do is they register it on a ledger, master ledger. So at some point down the road, this master ledger accumulates all the different transactions every single day or second, so that it knows, what Bitcoin was sold for what, and sold to somebody for what, and it's now re-registered to them, or what percentage is re-registered to them, and it goes on and on. It just never ends. It's decentralized so that even if somebody blows up, Russia, for instance, it doesn't make any difference because, you're on 20 different computers in different countries, or even 100 in the same country. So even though Russia's gone and maybe you did the transaction in Russia, it really makes no difference. Your Bitcoin's registered in different places. So, and it's in what they call the blockchain, which is part of that situation where it spreads out the knowledge of who owns that Bitcoin and what it's worth. That it's spread out. So that's kind of the good part, is that, it can't be destroyed or erased or non-created. It's there in the ether pretty much forever. The problem with Bitcoins, well, there's two problems really. One of the major problems with Bitcoins is that the value of that Bitcoin is not associated with a specific country, like the dollar is associated with the United States. And the United States backs up its dollars, no matter how many there are dollars available, with a lot of different assets, obviously. The United States has many companies, many assets such as ores and manufacturing plants and so forth and so on. So it's got some intrinsic value, no matter what you say about the fiat dollar. It's got an intrinsic value. Now, you can argue about that intrinsic value all day long, and it does come into play always, which is why you have inflation or you have deflation or different things happen to that coin. But Bitcoin's different. It's not backed up by any one government or any one society or piece of information. It is floated on a value based on what people think it's worth. All right, that's the best way to put that. It's on an exchange, so that one Bitcoin may have started out worth $100, we'll say, and then people started gambling on and it really is a gamble, saying, "Hey, I'm going to buy one of those Bitcoins because I think the value of that individual Bitcoin is going to go up," and they were right. It went up to 19,000 for a little while, and it did it pretty quickly, and it went back down to $2-3 for a while, or 100, whatever it was. And it went up again and down again, and it's done that several times. It is now something like $70,000 or $75,000 for a single Bitcoin. So if you bought one for $100, you did good. If you bought 10, you did even better. The problem is it varies a lot. And depending on the mood of the market, what's happening around the world, there's a lot of wars going on or a lot of things that are bad. People's confidence comes down. They want their money, and they don't want to hold it in the magic ether out there in all these computers. They want it in their hands. In fact, if they could, they get it in gold, and they can get it in gold. For different ways, but they don't particularly want it in Bitcoins or Ethereum. They want it in their hands. That way they know it's not going to go down, and it won't go up either, but it won't go down, at least not as fast. So. What happens when you do transactions with Bitcoins? And up till pretty recently, there wasn't a lot of transactions with Bitcoins, but in the last 5 or 10 years, there's a fair amount of places that are taking Bitcoins for merchandise. They're using it as legal tender, in different places and in different ways. So, how do these companies protect themselves on a Bitcoin that moves around? It was $70,000 yesterday. The day before that, it may have been $68,000. And it changes every day. It changes every hour. So how do they do it? If you want to go out with your Bitcoins, you got a bunch of Bitcoins you bought, and you want to go buy a car. Okay, so you go to the car and say, okay, how much for the car? $50,000. All right, I'm going to give you half of my Bitcoin, whatever the percentage that's worth today. And they say, okay, we'll take it. And there's a little fees on some of those things in Bitcoins. That's one of the little differences that there are as far as like e-commerce goes. Although there's certainly fees on e-commerce. On e-commerce, you're going to get your fees on the back end, or front end, however you want to call it, because you get a credit card, you're going to pay a percentage, that kind of thing. Okay, so, and the same goes for Bitcoins. But what the companies do, what the car companies did, if you go and buy yourself a car with a Bitcoin, what they're going to do is they're going to turn around with that Bitcoin, and once you do the deal, okay, once they're satisfied it's legit, and there are ways that they go through to satisfy it's legit. There's processes with a Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever you're using, so that if you use a specific coin, which you're going to, there is multiple transactions around the world, really, that verify that. So they wait till they get, maybe 6 or 7 or 10 verifications that come back from different places. And if it's all verified that this is a legitimate Bitcoin, it's in your name, and you're able to sell it or trade it. At that point, what they do is they take that Bitcoin that you gave them, or that percentage of it, then they go ahead out into the market, and there's several places that'll do this. They trade that Bitcoin for fiat money right away, because they don't want to take the market risk. Now, maybe it'll go up, maybe it'll go down. They don't care. You bought the car for whatever, $50,000. You gave them a Bitcoin that's worth $50,000 that minute. So they're going to take that out and transfer that $50,000 Bitcoin into $50,000 dollars if they're in the United States or whatever. And they're going to do it right that second, or as close to that second as they can. So, and the Bitcoin keeps on doing its thing, up and down, travels around, does its thing. So that's how that works. And that's pretty much, a never-ending scenario. I don't see Bitcoins becoming a staple for a lot of reasons. Number one, and I've dealt with some Bitcoins. I've done a fair amount of trade with Bitcoins. And I can tell you they're not so easy to trade. They tend to hold them if you do a trade in them, because it takes a while to verify that Bitcoin is legit. And it varies. The Bitcoin varies in value constantly. So, you got Bitcoin out there and you got it in some kind of account, and you got to keep track of it because it varies all the time. And then you got to get the Bitcoin in another situation if you want to buy something. So it's not as practical as a credit card or fiat dollars in your bank. Those you can do immediately. It doesn't take days for most transactions. It just happens quickly. So that's the advantage of using currency or e-currency, still based on currency, that they don't have in Bitcoins. And I don't really see the Bitcoins ever taking over the values of that. So how much business roughly is done with Bitcoins today? It's been around, 20 years, 18 years, whatever. Less than 1%, looks like. And that's hard to value that. It's hard to get an actual number of that around the world. But from the estimates I've seen, it could be as small as 1/10%. Actual purchases that are going on. Now, there's a lot of Bitcoin transactions that aren't purchases. But actual purchases, looks like it may be as little as 1/10% across the world. So not a lot, not a huge amount. You hear a lot of stuff about it going on, but it's just not a huge amount at this point. And, I think the risk is much greater than most, small buyers are willing to deal with. So I think that's not going to ever be a big issue. So back to Mars. we strayed off for a minute. We're back. Mars, you need a currency up there. You need something of value. All right, because number one, the people that are on Mars initially and later on have to have some form of currency established so that they can do their trading, because everybody needs to trade for something. I mean, they need food, or they want to sell their food. They want to sell, they dug up some gold and want to sell that, or whatever. Okay, they need currency. Now, we certainly can use some currencies from around the world. That's a possibility. In fact, probably a high probability initially. But, I don't think it's appropriate to use American dollars or Japanese yen or whatever, or what do you call it, or whatever over there. I just don't think it's appropriate to use that, or I think that they need their own currency. They need their own banking systems. They need stuff that makes sense on a world that's, 6 months away from Earth. They can wait 6 months for a loan. All right, send me that $10,000 loan. I'll be here when it gets here. So they need it right there, right on the spot. And of course, that is absolutely one of the forms of people that come to that world to do business, bankers. So things have to be established. Obviously, those have to be established by a form of government, which we'll get into in some other podcasts. But the deal is that they have to have, a method of transferring currencies throughout Mars. I mean, that's really what it comes right down to. And of course, you'll have the same thing goes on between, the dollar and the yen and whatever. I mean, they have a system of currency balances back and forth. A yen or a dollar's worth so many yen, vice versa. Same thing will happen to Mars. Now the question is, what do you call the Mars currency? I don't know. Send me an email. See what you think. Got some catchy name, catchy phrase for dollars? It sounds good to me. All right, we could call the dollars red planet. That's kind of cool. Whatever. Okay. The canyon. Dollars are canyons. The smaller change would be potholes or boulders, whatever. I mean, just saying. Just throwing it out there. But I think that it's worth considering what we're going to do early on before we get to Mars, how it's going to take effect out there, and what financial system, and some of the rules and regulations for the financial system, because it's very important. That's what was lacking, in the early years of the United States and in many countries, is that they didn't have a rules and regulations. They're backing it up. So the big problem that we have, and one of the reasons we have such runaway inflation from time to time, is that at one point early in our, wasn't all that early, but years ago, our currency, our fiat dollars, let's say, was backed by hard gold. Okay. For a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is that we're back to the same thing again. It takes X number of hours for a human being to find and mill out and produce gold. So, you can't just create gold out of thin air. And the deal with with having our money backed up by gold, and the reason we don't anymore, is because they needed more money than they had gold. That's what it comes right down to. So they once again printed up more money and said, hell with that gold stuff. And that's what happened. That's what happened around, I don't even know the exact year, but it's been many years since that happened. So a lot of calls for getting back in the gold system. I don't see that happening. The problem with the gold system, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing it, but the gold system really ties a country to how much gold it can get its hands on. That's all there is to it. If it grows substantially, maybe you can't, replicate enough gold to satisfy the amount of dollars it needs. Because it does need a certain amount of dollars for its goods. I mean, the reality is that, in advanced civilization, you could produce twice as much goods, but not get twice as much gold. So that's a real issue, and that's why they did it a different way. We have the United States. If you're not familiar with the banking system in the United States, there's a couple ways that they can produce money, and they do it out of thin air. So it's not some complicated issue. They do it through the banking system. They give a bank X number of dollars, and it's allowed to lend out more than those dollars are worth. So it's $100, you can lend out 1,000 or whatever. I mean, that's just the way it works. And they produce more dollars to do that. So that's the way that works, and that's the way it's going to have to work up at Mars also. There'll have to be loans in different situations because people are going to need to do, buy equipment, sell equipment, buy electrical time, buy heat, cell phones, whatever. So all that will have to go on. So I'll take some suggestions on what the dollars can be on Mars. I think it'd be pretty cool. I want some names on the Mars dollars. So send me some information. Let me know if you got any questions on that. I don't know if I can answer. I'm not a financial guru. I was a stockbroker for a good while, and a commodities broker. So I have some ideas on what goes on and what doesn't go on in finance departments. But I think that the issue of having dollars on Mars is pretty straightforward. We're going to need fiat dollars or a representation of money on Mars. That's it. Let us do it. We want to thank you for listening. We appreciate it. Keep in mind, the Mars loci means that's the second spot for humanity. Second loci, location. Thanks a bunch.